William Beats on the track.
I have Michael DeVito on the podcast today, and we're going to talk some about faith and football, and he's going to tell a little bit of his story. Mike is a former NFL linebacker. He played for Kansas City Chiefs, the New York Jets, and he also hosts his own podcast, the 3 Point Stance podcast.
I go for gold like I'm getting a gun from James Bond. First shot, I'ma kill it, never remain calm. Clever with the lyrics, been fire dragon for Mulan. Fit for all this rapping, just need a stage with shoes on. This is just a rehearsal and not the main song. Lyrics raining, the wind is blowing the dang palms. I've been looking for something for me to go and bang on.
So, Mike, how you doing today, man?
Clark, it's awesome to be here, brother. Doing well. How you doing?
Doing good. I'm actually we're missing the LSU Bama game right now. I'm in Louisiana, so we're diehard Tigers fans. But we're missing the big game.
Pretty important interview then.
Yeah, man, that's how important you are. We were like, hey, forget about LSU. We got Mike DeVito on the podcast. Let's do it.
I'm honored, brother.
Yeah. It's a pretty close game right now. We've been keeping up with it. So, but yeah, man, it's good to have you on. Mike, do you play fantasy football?
You know, I don't. It's something I never got into. It's funny, Clark. You and I were talking before we started recording. Like, I'm not really a sports guy or a football guy. I enjoyed playing football. I enjoy I enjoy doing the podcast and talking to former players and doing stuff like that and hearing about people's, stories and what, different things they're going through outside of football. But I've never been a huge sports junkie, you know what I mean? So I never got into the fantasy football stuff, never really, I didn't even know LSU and Bama were playing right now. That's how, I'm not ashamed to admit it, brother.
Yeah. I've been playing with our church as a group, and we play fantasy football, and it just stresses me out. So I don't know why I keep doing it every year, but I can't, enjoy the game. I just want to watch the game, and I'm worried about, some wide receiver or tight end putting up points or whatever, but...
Well, that's what's cool. That's what I've heard is cool about fantasy football is it gives you a reason to watch all the games, right? Because you've got guys all over the league. Whereas, if you're just fan of one team, you might not be interested in a certain game, or a team that's not doing well. But if you got a guy on your fantasy roster, now you're going to be plugged into the game. So I get it. That's interesting. That's a cool way to get you more involved in the season.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Your story is really unique, and that's why we brought you on today, just to kind of dive into your story. I first heard about you. I'm a student at Houston Baptist, and I know you. Did you graduate Houston Baptist as well?
Yeah.
So I heard about you through Houston Baptist University and heard a little bit of your story. And I wonder if you could if you don't mind, just walking us through some of your journey into professional football, and then how that actually transferred into where you are now and some of the things you're studying in regards to apologetics, theology, all that fun stuff. But just tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. So I went to college at the University of Maine. And, you talk about a blessing of a place to go to school. I met Jesus, my wife, my best friend, and I had an opportunity to play in the NFL and got a free education. So I was blessed beyond belief to go up to the University of Maine, and I had a great experience there. I was there from 2002 to 2006. In 2007, I got signed by the New York Jets as a free agent. So coming out of college, I didn't get drafted. I was a free agent. And the month before I left to go to New York to start my NFL career, I met Jesus and became a Christian. So it was perfect timing right before I went into the NFL. One thing that I remember that changed in me after I got saved, there are a number of things that changed in me, obviously, but one thing was my interest in academics. And at that point, it was theology. I thought, well, I've become a Christian. I want to plug in and learn more about God. So I started studying theology, right? So I'm doing my football career, and on my downtime, I'm reading books, reading the Bible, reading concordances and study Bibles and things like that. And the one thing I noticed about theology is I would get into arguments with other Christians over things like Calvinism and Arminian, or, the Trinity, or, these different theological issues where people are pretty close-handed with what they believe, and there's not much give and take, right? It's either this, my way or the highway. And I understand that with theology, but that wasn't really what I was looking for. And so I kind of shelved theology for that reason, because I said, this is too there's too much conflict here. I'm looking more for an exchange of ideas. And so put that on the shelf for a little bit. And then in 2009, the team chaplain for the New York Jets, who I was playing with at the time, I was with the Jets from 2007 to 2012. The team chaplain gave me a book by Timmy Keller called The Reason for God, Timothy Keller, and just a fantastic book. I don't know if you've read it, Clark, but I mean, it's just sort of lay level apologetics, answering objections to the faith. And I didn't even know the term apologetics at that time, but I just said, whatever he's doing in this book, this is what I want to do. And so from 2009 through the end of my career, I played 2009 to 2012 with the Jets, and then 2013 to 2015 with the Chiefs, and I retired in 2016. Again, in my off time, I would be studying apologetics, right? And so William Lane Craig, Lacona, all the big wigs, studying and following their work and watching the debates. And so when I retired in 2016, that fall semester, I enrolled at HBU. Mike Lacona actually reached out to me and said, I see that you like apologetics. You should come to Houston Baptist. We have a great program here. I had 2 little kids, so he said, you can do it all online. It's perfect. So I signed up at HBU, and my first semester was a fall semester, 2016. And my first professor was Dr. Tyler McNabb. And my first class was philosophy of religion. And so I spent a lot of time with Dr. McNabb doing things like this, Skyping and emailing and plugging through that philosophy of religion class. And I realized at that point that it wasn't apologetics that I wanted to do, but philosophy. I loved apologetics and I still enjoy it, but I was like, I'm even more interested in, do abstract objects exist and all these kind of esoteric metaphysical things and epistemology. And so it was great because, HBU and Dr. Talon, Dr. Philip Talon, he worked with me and I kind of built a curriculum with some independent studies that was more focused on philosophy. So I did metaphysics, I did epistemology, I did ethics, and I was able to do it all from home. And I did these independent studies with Dr. McNabb. And so we became really close. And he's like, listen, when you get done at HBU, you got to go get a PhD. And so he said, you got to go get another master's degree in philosophy and then try to get a PhD. And so after HBU, I graduated HBU in the spring of 2018. And then I started that fall at the University of Edinburgh. They have an online, a distance program for philosophy. And so I'm finishing that up now. I'm in my last semester there. And then this offseason, I'll hopefully apply. I'm going to start applying to PhD programs in philosophy. And so that's kind of my academic journey from theology to apologetics to philosophy. And obviously I skipped a lot of steps in there, but that's kind of the rough go at it. And I love it, Clark. I mean, I can do philosophy and theology and apologetics all day. I mean, I just enjoy studying it. And I don't know if it's the Holy Ghost or if I just hit my head enough times to get it in the right, because prior to me coming to Christ, I was, a C student, didn't care much about school, just kind of did it to get by, did it to stay eligible, so it wasn't bad. But it wasn't like something I was interested in. Now, I could go 24 hours a day. Like I'm upset when I have to go to sleep because it means I can't be studying. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
So that's where I'm at now, and it's great. I'm really enjoying it.
Wow, man, that's an amazing story. You have to love to learn if you're gonna do philosophy. I just graduated that very class that you mentioned. I just took it this semester. Now it's Dr. Melissa Kane Travis is teaching it.
Yes.
So I just finished that course, and man, you're talking about the ontological argument, arguments from proper basic beliefs in God.
Yeah.
For people who haven't heard of these arguments for God, they're really well built. And we did a lot of Alvin Plantinga, because I know Dr. McNabb is a Plantinga fan.
Right.
So, it's just really, really in-depth arguments. And I enjoy apologetics. I didn't want to go the philosophy route. I got my fix of, just studying it. But you have to really work to be a philosopher. You have to really put in the time. And, it's such a unique thing, man, because I guess people, they maybe stereotypically think a guy plays football, you get hit in the head a lot, and, you're studying philosophy now. I mean, it's just a unique journey, and, just a lot to it. Of course, to be a professional football player, the amount of work ethic that you've had to put in to get to that place is just probably, more than most people want to put in. And so you can apply that to your study now. It's just, what it takes to gain that talent, to gain that skill or ability. And that's what you're doing now. It's just unique to see the transition from NFL to, now you're studying philosophy. Man, it's just it's a cool story.
It's funny, Clark, because you and I, when you had some correspondence prior to the podcast, we were talking about our love for jujitsu.
Yeah.
And philosophy, like football and like jujitsu, is very similar in the sense that it's competitive, right? Like
Right.
it's an aggressive exchange of ideas where you're battling, right? You're putting forth your argument, and then other people are attacking it, and you're counter arguing. but underneath it all, generally is this desire on both sides to learn and grow and get better and get sharpened by the other side. And so I think that's why I enjoy it so much, because unlike science and some of the hard sciences and things like that, it really is an argument. It's a dialectic. It's an argumentative discipline, and it's competitive.
Right.
And so I think it gets my competitive juices going. Right? It's like, oh, I can't wait to I'll be on the discussion boards. Right? Like I just got done with one prior to hopping on with you, where I'm posting an argument or some thoughts about an argument on there, and I'm like checking in all day to see who responded so I could get in a fight. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
I enjoy it. And I think that's why it's so much like jujitsu, and it's so much like football in that you're competing.
Right. Yeah. And for those who do compete in something competitive like jujitsu, man, you have to put yourself constantly in the place of people who are way better than you, who can beat you up, who can put you on the mat. And, it's funny, man. I walked into an MMA gym, and that's actually how a lot of my love for apologetics started. Some conversations in the gym with guys, but that would just beat me up, man. Of course, I'm a tiny guy. I'm not like you. I probably can't just walk in and take some guys down. But learning jiu-jitsu, man, you have to learn all these principles. And, yeah, you're right. It's very competitive. And the thing about philosophy that's so great was going to HBU, you're around these professors who have done the homework, they've done the time, and they can challenge your ideas and push you to be better. And of course, the students that I'm in the classroom with have pushed me to be better. And sometimes when I think I have an argument and I know it in and out, and I've finally figured it out, is when my professor will say, no, that's wrong, or you need to rethink that, go back to the drawing board. But that's cool, man. It just shows you the discipline that goes into, not just a walk with God, but an intellectual defense of the faith. I believe people can be Christians without that, but I don't know how they do it. I have to have this intellectual engagement with the culture, with the people around me. And, for you, I don't know how much you had to rely on your faith as a football player, in the locker room, if you ever had these conversations, or if you, I don't know, but I'm just saying you're surrounded by people that more than likely don't believe the same things you believe. And so you're going to eventually run into those conversations where you got to really, have some good reasons, some things to offer that matter to other people,
Yeah, it actually more manifested towards the end of my career with what you're talking about. In Kansas City, we ended up forming kind of organically this reading group. And so it was two Muslims, an atheist, and myself. And these were people, one other player, and then two people who worked in the player development department for the Chiefs. And their office was right by the practice field. And so we would be, before we went out to practice or after practice, the four of us would gather in that office and just talk culture, apologetics, from all these different perspectives. And these guys were really smart guys. And so I knew I had to bring it, you know what I mean? I knew they were going to challenge my beliefs. I knew they were going to, bring up objections to Christianity. And so it was fun. And this kind of primed me for, it would have been nice having my HBU education going into that, you know what I mean? But it really got me fired up and ready, because I realized how shallow my faith was, not my faith, but how shallow my knowledge of my belief system was in certain areas. I would get pressed on certain areas like evolution or morality, or, the different areas that people press in. And I didn't always have a good answer for it. And so it really motivated me leaving, where I was like, I'm definitely going to figure this stuff out, you know?
Right. Yeah, man. Yeah, and I think it's just so key for Christians today. We're not in the same culture even that we were 30, 40 years ago. Most people today are very skeptical of Christianity, and I think that gives us just a great. It's a unique time to live in. I don't look at that as a bad thing. I look at that as, this is a time for Christians to really dig in your heels and find out if what you believe is true. And I think some people are scared to explore these questions because their faith is so valuable to them that they're scared they may lose it. And
Right.
that hasn't been my experience. I've put my faith on the line and
Right.
and tested it, and it's only gotten stronger.
I haven't heard too many testimonies where people put their faith on the line and genuinely plugged in and came out the other side an atheist, right?
Right.
How many stories do you hear about people doing that and just and that was that was my testimony. I mean, I same thing. Apologetics forces you to do that, right? Like you have to objectively evaluate your beliefs
Right.
and put them up against different objections. And you're right. My beliefs have come out so much stronger. I actually wanted to ask you, Clark, because I did the philosophy track. You did the cultural apologetics
Yes.
track. And the one thing I'm noticing in my apologetic conversations now is people are really not interested in a syllogism. Like when people put forth these different societal issues, or you see what's the big the hot button issues nowadays with the what's the word I'm looking for, the woke stuff and the
Hmm.
that's not a good word for it. The social justice stuff. I apologize. No, I didn't mean to use the word woke. The social justice stuff, where it's really a heart issue, and there's a lot of I feel like there's a lot of cultural apologetics that can build that bridge and work within those contexts. And I'd be curious to get your opinion, because I'm like, well, where's the syllogism? Like, what's the underlying arguments? And people are like, we don't care about that. Don't work. I'm really, bucking up against the wall with just using philosophy and philosophical apologetics. So have you found that cultural apologetics, like what's the difference between the two? And have you felt that it's a little bit easier to do apologetics with that cultural kind of bullet in the gun, so to speak, I guess?
Right. What I've found is you you do have in cultural apologetics, the philosophy is still there, but it's not a syllogism like you say. So if
Right.
you put forth a syllogism, most people and for people who are listening that don't know what that is, it's 3 points or maybe more, but if God exists, if evil exists, then maybe good exists, and maybe God exists. You just go down the line.
Right.
I
Right.
just botched that one, but you know what I'm talking about. The
No, yeah,
syllogism,
that's it.
therefore God exists. So, I found that a lot of people will just write those syllogisms off without understanding them. And I
Mm.
feel like that's where cultural apologetics comes into play, is I want to try to build a bridge of understanding the philosophy that undergirds my faith. And so
Right.
I think we need the philosophers to really, really get to the technical side of those things and shore up the things that we believe. But as a cultural apologist, what I try to do is, I might take a film. The Joker film just came out, and I wrote an article about that time, talking about some of the philosophy of the Joker or the ideas of the Joker. I'm trying to connect to this culture and get them
Mm.
to see the meaning of the syllogism. What does it
Right.
mean? And so
Right.
I feel like that's where cultural apologists and philosophical apologists they just are so good working hand in hand. Whereas I might not want to go down the technical rabbit hole that you're going to want to go down. I do want to bring some meaning and some clarity to the things you're saying, and I think that's where it is. It's just bringing some meaning or some clarity, maybe through a cultural lens. Maybe you can talk about the philosophy embedded in a certain film, or because there is, when you watch films, you're seeing arguments put forth in a
Right.
lot of ways. And
Right.
so, it's very subtle, and if you're not trained in this, you might not even notice it, but it's there. And
Right.
so that's just what I feel as a cultural apologist is sort of the goal there.
Well, yeah, you're working the mind and the heart at the same time, right? We
Right.
connect to it on an emotional level with the films and the music and the cultural things, and so you guys are hitting both with the mind and the heart, where it's like I've really learned the importance of that. late, especially lately with all the stuff that's going on in society and having to confront some of these social issues. Yeah, just going back to what I said, like people don't care about the syllogism.
Yeah.
My buddy called me out the other day about some of the social justice stuff and said, "Why don't you just say bad things have happened and I'm sorry, and what can we do to move forward? Like, why do you care about if the argument works or if it's logical or like people don't want to hear that and you're not getting anywhere with what you're saying." And I was just like, yeah, you're right. So I'm coming around to that, the importance of working the heart as much as the mind. So I admire what you do because it's not easy to do both. It's not easy to have both of those gifts.
Right.
That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I just, I try my best to be sure. I think what my weakness would be to maybe err on some of the philosophy, and so I have to go back to the drawing board at times and make sure that what I'm saying adds up. Instead of
Right.
making points or jumping over a point, or so that's where the philosophy comes into play for me, and it's where I'm glad that I've had some classes in philosophy. I know a little bit about logic and
Right.
how that works. And so, I definitely enjoy the philosophers. When I came into HBU, I was actually on the philosophical track, and I changed my mind and wanted to go to the cultural track. I just think
Yeah.
everybody has their giftings and what God's called them to do, and so it's pretty unique hearing your story. I wanted to ask you. I noticed that you actually gave a lecture, if I'm correct, at HBU. I guess upon your graduating and all those things, you gave a talk at HBU, and Dr. William Lane Craig was there.
Yeah.
Um, Man, that's amazing. So I
Well,
don't know what that was about. I was not able to be there that night, but I did see all these posts going up. Michael DeVito, did this lecture and he killed it and all that good stuff. He did a great job. So, could you tell me a little bit about what that event was for you, and maybe even the influence Dr. Craig has had in your life?
oh man, this was such a fun that was such a fun experience. So that was actually a year ago. My mom is in town right now, and she actually came with me to that event. It was right after I graduated, and she had helped me editing my papers and stuff like that. So I wanted to bless her for all the help that she did. So I said, "Why don't you come down with me to this event?" So I'm trying to remember the name of the lecture series, but HBU invited me to come down. It was twofold. We had started a scholarship that we had named after William Lane Craig. And so I was part of that. We were going to start the scholarship, and we were going to honor him with it because of everything he's done. And so he was okay with it, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to be there. You come down, give the lecture." He was there that week teaching, Dr. William Lane Craig, and so um, it worked out that I got a chance to meet him and spend time with him and eat dinner with him after the lecture. And so yeah, so going into the lecture, it was funny that morning. I woke up in the hotel and my throat was swollen. I couldn't talk. I had caught some kind of, I can't forget what it was, but something that made my throat swell up and I couldn't talk. I had to go to the emergency room.
Oh man.
They gave me, so I'm already nervous about this talk, and now I can't talk. I went to the emergency room in the afternoon. They gave me some shot that made it go away, and so thank God for that because I almost wasn't able to do the lecture. But then going into the lecture, it was a business lecture, so I was talking about football and faith and how that applies to the business world. Um, and I'm talking to my mentor and best friend Tyler McNabb and William Lane Craig and Jerry Walls and Joshua Farrer. There's so many titans of the faith and apologists in the crowd, and I've done a lot of things. I mean, I've run out of stadiums with 100,000 people, and played in front of all these people, and I don't know if I've ever been so nervous, and especially with William Lane Craig there in the crowd listening to my lecture. But the lecture went really well, and I got a chance again to do dinner with him afterward at the president's house.
Mm.
Uh, and it was just incredible to be around him. I mean, he's just such a unique person in the sense that he's incredibly humble and just a nice and I want to say meek almost a very loving person. But you see him in those debates and you see him in his lectures, and I'm so used to seeing him in action where he's just a pit bull, he's just
Mm.
taking people down with his arguments and just crushing these atheists. And so, I mean, you step foot into apologetics, and he's one of the first people you come across. And so I had followed all of his work since 2009. I had his Reasonable Faith and his website and his books and all. I mean, he was my go-to for everything, and he still is. But to get to meet him, and then what was really cool, prior to me giving the lecture, we announced the scholarship. So William Lane Craig came on stage with me, and he just said, "I want to thank Mike DeVito for starting this scholarship," and just the fact that he knew who I was, knew my name. I was like, you talk about sports and how people have their sports heroes, and people. There's nobody I've looked up to and kind of call my hero other than more than William Lane Craig. And so I was starstruck the whole weekend being down there at HBU and seeing him. And so it was a lot of fun to get to know him and get to spend time with him. And it was an honor to start that scholarship in his name, because he really, I mean, what he's done for the faith. I mean, when you think of apologetics and how he's advanced the kingdom of God through apologetics, I mean, I don't know of anybody outside of Jesus and the apostles that have been, that I know. I mean, I'm not a historian, so I'm sure there are others, but what he's done is just changed the game. I mean, changed the game with Alvin Flanagan, Richard Swinburne, guys like that. So obviously a hero of the faith and somebody that I have a ton of respect for.
This podcast is brought to you today by Anchor Podcasts. Anchor makes podcasting easy. Just upload your audio recording and the Anchor team will handle the rest. Anchor will publish your podcast on the majority of podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many more. Not only that, but Anchor will find you sponsors who actually pay for your advertisement. Every time someone downloads our podcast, we get paid, which helps us to continue growing Solid Faith, continue these interviews on God, faith, and Christianity. Visit Anchor today at anchor.fm to learn more. That's anchor.fm. Right. Yeah, man, that's so cool. HBU does a good job of connecting people to these apologists that are phenomenal. They've done so many huge things. I could hardly believe that as a new student at HBU. I thought, am I really going to, get to learn from some of these people? And sure enough, man, you're learning and you're in the classroom with them. And I mean, it's just amazing. And for those who are listening, that because some of our listeners are new to apologetics, maybe they don't even know who William Lane Craig is. If you're new to apologetics, you're new to studying the faith. Like Mike said, you'll come across his name shortly. He'll definitely pop up on YouTube, and he's done some incredible debates. He's debated some of the atheism's boogeymen. Some of their biggest, baddest guys, and not only did he hold his own, but he sort of mopped the floor with a lot of big bad guys in atheism, and it's not really about winning those arguments for him. It's more about presenting this clear, concise case for the gospel and winning people, and so you can just feel, like you said, he's humble. I actually went to HBU because he was there, and he taught a special course on God and abstract objects. As a person who doesn't enjoy philosophy, man, I'm sitting in God and abstract objects. So I wanted to meet this philosopher, and I hear this guy coming down the hallway, and he walks in, and this is the William Lane Craig that I've seen on YouTube, debating these atheists. And I'm in a classroom of about 10 people, and he's got these funny sneakers on and these white, socks on, and just the most just normal guy,
Right.
But it just you wouldn't imagine how humble he is. And of course, at the end of the course, he took all of us out to eat, and I'm there, and I get to meet his wife, Miss Jan, and just some of the kindest people, and just so humble, and just really about the faith that they live. And it's just been life-changing to be at HBU and to learn from these people. So yeah, like you said, I mean, he's just done so much for the faith, and these philosophical arguments, I mean, he's really brought a lot of them to the forefront, and
No
just
doubt.
made a huge difference.
What's really cool about Dr. Craig, to use a football analogy, is he'll go and play on the away turf, right? Like he'll go to the away. So like, oh, you're good at physics? Like, let's debate God over physics. You're good at math? Well, okay, let's have an argument about God, mathematics. Oh, the history of the resurrection? Boom, I got that. Abstract objects? Boom. I mean, he's just a math. What I've noticed in the philosophy world is you have people who specialize in certain areas, and what's so interesting about the Christian philosophy world and Christian apologetics with guys like William Lane Craig, Alvin Plantinga, Richard Swinburne is they seem to have a really robust grasp on the academic world as it relates to apologetics, right? So, I mean, they can argue with anybody on anybody's turf about you want metaphysics, epistemology, physics, wherever you want to go. We got that, you know, and so that's another thing that's really impressive about him. And for your listeners who are new to it, Dr. Craig has all kinds of resources that are accessible from level 0 to level 1,000, right? I mean, if you go to his website, Reasonable Faith, or check out On Guard, some of his book named On Guard, or his book Reasonable Faith, more intermediate work there. I mean, he just got across the board. He's got all kinds of stuff from wherever you're at in your journey to help you with apologetics. So yeah, he's just an incredible person. And you're right, unassuming when you meet him.
Right. Yeah, man. HBU is just a wonderful place too for those who are interested in studying apologetics. I had no idea what I was getting into, man, with this program, and I've just been so thankful for the investment that I've made to the program and just meeting these people. It's phenomenal, and you know, just you see these guys, and you would think that they would just be, I don't know. You've accomplished so much, you'd think maybe they would be full of themselves. It's the total opposite, man. These guys are hard workers and successful and humble people. And, you know, you mentioned them going on to the turf of people who that they don't even specialize in that field, and yet they can debate it. I mean, that shows you the work ethic that goes in to that level of philosophy. And we studied Alvin Plantinga over the last semester, this philosophy of religion class that we talked about. And, you know, he makes an evolutionary argument against naturalism. And it's one of the most profound arguments. And it's just so powerful and just direct. And, you know, that's been one of those arguments that has raised a lot of eyebrows for naturalists. And, you know, these guys, they don't mind doing that. They don't mind engaging with people who are completely on another turf than they are. They're that
Right.
confident in their faith. And that's inspiring for students, you know, like myself, that want to learn. I mean, that's inspiring, man.
What's really interesting about Plantinga that you bring up, the evolutionary argument against naturalism is my hands down favorite argument, and the different kind of extensions to it. I mean, it's just such a fantastic argument. And the thing that I noticed as my studies went on, and I studied Plantinga more, and my best friend being Tyler, him being a Plantingian scholar, I got a lot of Plantinga stuff working with him, was Plantinga's work literally changed the game. So Plantinga isn't a debater like Craig, right? Where he's going to get and go. I mean, he has debated, but that's not his primary focus. But Plantinga writes a book, and it changes that discipline, right? So Plantinga writes Nature and Necessity, and modal logic is totally now on a totally different trajectory because of his work. And he writes different books on the problem of evil, and now the problem of evil scholarship is totally changed because of his work. I mean, he's just lights out, one of the greatest philosophers to ever live. And I think it's a testimony, really speaks to the fact that he's on our team. I mean, he's a Christian, and he's one of the best thinkers, you know, that's ever walked the earth.
Right, man. Yeah, that's the thing. Coming into apologetics, I just thought that that I just didn't realize just the depth of learning and knowledge and skill that these guys bring to the table. And yeah, when you come across their work and you see how just powerful it is, and some of Plantinga's arguments, you know, when I came into apologetics, those would have been the syllogisms or the arguments that I would have wrote off until they had some
Right.
meaning and I understood them. And Edward Fazer talks a little bit about this. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but
Yeah, that's right.
he talks about, these arguments that people like Plantinga made that he wrote off originally as he was an atheistic philosophy professor. And then as he started to really try to understand the arguments or read them, it was key in his conversion to Christianity. These arguments that are made are so powerful and profound, and there's so much depth to them. At a surface level, some people, they may not understand the ontological argument,
Right.
but as you start to study, you go, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And so I think for people getting started in apologetics, I recommend staying clear a little bit of those things first, and just getting a little bit of a understanding of what apologetics is, but as you go down the line, those things are just so profound, and they'll gear you with the ability to recognize straw man arguments or bad arguments, or things that are just ripe with flaws that you hear from the other side of the table. And I think
Right.
that's what's gave these guys the ability to go into other places and debate, or places that physics, and you're a philosopher and you're debating a physicist about physics. It's
Right.
pretty powerful.
Well, I mean, one thing they've done on a more popular level, going off of what you said, if they've really exposed the new atheism, right? I
Right.
mean, so new atheism comes on the scene with Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Dan Dennett and these kind of popular level new atheist books where they're just taking shots at Christianity. And philosophers like William Lane Craig and Alvin Plantinga have done a great job of coming on the scene and just exposing the issues with these arguments and basically just flattening them. And that's been huge for the faith because those books had a massive impact. I mean, Dawkins' book sold millions of copies. I mean, they had a massive cultural impact. And yet this countercultural impact from these philosophers like Craig and Plantinga, who have come on the scenes and kind of neutralized those arguments, and really shown them to be just awful arguments. I mean, just really at the basic philosophy 101 level, they are just terrible arguments. And so I mean, we just keep hitting on the
Right.
advances they've made, and I think it speaks to what you're saying. And your ministry, it's so important to learn these things. I mean, even at level 0, right? I still don't understand the ontological argument, but I know Yuji Nagasawa, who's the PhD supervisor at the University of Birmingham, so obviously a really smart guy. He converted from atheism to theism just based on that argument.
Wow.
So just knowing that there's these arguments out there and that really smart people defend them, and it actually changes the minds of really smart people, should give us a lot of hope as Christians. I think you don't need to know all the premises to know that these arguments are effective. And there's a lot more to our faith than just, well, I said a prayer and I gave my life to Christ and it just stops there. There's an
Right.
intellectual side of this. And I think nowadays with the way culture is shifting, and you know this, I mean, the way universities are becoming more secular, and the way just the population in general is becoming more secular in the West, the need for apologetics is just growing. And because of that, the resources are there. People are putting out great resources for apologists, new apologists to get into and learn. And William Lane Craig has said this before. A lot of times, people will just give up if you give a list of arguments for the existence of God, right? So they say, why do you believe in God? Well, there's the Kalam argument, there's the moral argument, there's the teleological argument, there's the ontological. That right there will be enough just to stop people in their tracks, right? So apologetics has a lot of it's incredibly useful, especially nowadays for our own faith and for the faith of others around us in our own ministry. And we're commanded to do it, right? I mean, we're told to defend the faith in a number of
Right.
places in the scriptures. So yeah, I'm with you. I concur. It's really fun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, shifting gears here too. Like I mentioned earlier, your story's inspiring. I know. For you, it's when you're the one who's accomplished these things, you may even get tired of hearing of it. But as a person who's on the outside of it, who sees, you played in the NFL, that in itself is so huge. I mean, there's a lot of people that work tirelessly, effortlessly to make it to the NFL that don't make it all the way there, and have given all their time, energy to get there, and you did. And I wonder if you could expound on, because there are people who are in changing seasons in their life. You're no longer playing in the NFL. You're in this season of you've moved over into another arena. It's something that you enjoy, obviously, and you're passionate about. But how are you adjusting to that new season in life where you've gone from, you play football, you give so much to the game of football, and now, you're in a transition season. If you could expound on that, if you don't mind expounding on some of that personally, that seasonal change in your life.
Yeah, the change, retiring from football, is hands down the most difficult thing I've had to go through, and it's still a struggle for me. And the one, it's convicting in a lot of ways. One of the ways it was massively convicting was I always paid lip service to the fact that Jesus, my identity is found in Christ, right? My identity is found as, I'm a Christian, and the gospel and everything else is far second to that. And what I came to realize when I retired, that was not the case. That football was my identity. That was 100% my identity and my foundation. And now that identity was gone. And so here we are 3 years later, and it's still, I still have really, and I think one of the reasons why I stay away from watching football and being around it is because it's very hard for me. I miss the game like crazy. I'd spent 2 decades, 24/7, 365, devoting everything to football. And so it's when that's done, it's done. I mean, there's no easing out, right? It's like you're on the train and then you're off, and that train's gone. And so it's been really hard. And if I didn't have apologetics, theology, philosophy, I don't know, I would really be in a bad spot. I mean, this is what I've transitioned into, and really starting to pick up traction now, where it's become, like I said, I don't want to go to bed at night because I'm so excited to be doing philosophy and studying. But it wasn't like that at first, and it was really hard. It was hard on my marriage. It was hard as a parent. I would wake up every day with a pit in my stomach, and I still do, especially during the season, watching the guy. I mean, there's no way to hide from it now. Social media, TV. I mean, no matter where you turn, football, is in the spotlight. And oh man, I miss it like crazy. And I wish I could be out there. And I went out on my own terms. My last year was 2015 was my last season. I had 2 concussions, and those were things I hadn't dealt with concussions prior to that. And so you can mess around with your knees and your shoulders and all the other things, your back. But when you start messing around with your head, it starts changing who you are, right? And so that was one of my reasons for retiring. But I had an opportunity to go back. I had a number of opportunities to go back in 2016 and play, and I chose not to. And that hurt.
Yeah.
But, looking back, like now, I think, should I have gone back and done another year? Maybe that, it's always, the grass is always greener, right? While I was playing football, I couldn't wait to be done and retired. And now that I'm retired, I wish I could go back. So maybe that's just human nature. But it's been a really difficult season, and having something like philosophy and the schooling and the academics, and getting to meet people like you and my best friend Tyler, and the different people you meet doing this has really helped me. And it's something that the NFL tries to prepare you for when you're playing. There's a number of things that the NFL and the NFLPA do as far as seminars and things in the off season, different workshops to try to help guys transition, because they know when you get there, they know how tough it is. There's a crazy statistic, Clark. I mean, I think it's 75% of NFL players are broke and divorced within 3 years of retirement. And so this isn't something that's unique to me. I mean, it's just a hard thing to give up, and it wrecks a lot of families. So the NFL tries to prep. They know the statistics, and they try to prep guys for it. But when you're in the NFL and doing it, you don't care about what it's going to be like when you get done. There's not enough time to worry about that. You have to worry about football, and so nobody really pays it much mind, and it's too bad because. It's really hard when you get done. I wish I had more of a hopeful story. It's been, this is my 4th season out, my 3rd year out, and this has been the best year so far.
Yeah.
This is the one I felt the best. So I'm starting to get far enough away from it where I'm feeling, better. I can get by day to day. But there were some really tough days in there. There were some learning experiences, and it forced me to refine my identity in Christ. And I recognize the fact that if your identity is found in anything but Jesus and his message, you're playing a risky game, because money, relationships, job, your job, your career, your vocation, all that can end in an instant. And if that's your identity and that's your foundation, and that foundation's gone, there ain't much left, and then that's when bad things happen, broke and divorced and all these other nasty things that come with it. So I got to stare that face to face, and I thought of myself as somebody pretty emotionally stable and pretty, with it and reflective, and even being that type of person, I mean, it just wrecked me, absolutely wrecked me. Um, but again, pushing, being forced to push back into the gospel and learning about who Jesus is, and then building another social network because you lose the locker room, right? You lose the guys that you're doing the day to day with. So building another social network of men and women to plug into and learn from, and then focusing on being a better husband and being a better father, just continuing to be intentional about those things and working to attack those things like I did football. Like I want to be great at these things like I was great at football. That's kind of been my mindset, and I'm starting to get through it, get out of it. But yeah, it was tough. It was really tough, and I wish I had a better story as far as like this is how I did it. But it's really just been kind of plugging back into the things that are really important and time.
Right, right, man. Yeah, thank you for just even asking that question. I don't really love asking that question because I don't want to bring that back up. But your transparency and you just being real about it. I think that's what more people can relate to. It's one of the things that I appreciate about studying apologetics is we get very, very honest about the truth about where we're at, and a lot of times that's in the form of arguments, but it changes also the way you talk about your faith. When I'm talking about my faith with other people, I tell them, hey, I'm not perfect. There's been times in my life where I've had severe doubts, and that's what led me to apologetics. People can appreciate that honesty and that transparency of, I missed the game, or I miss playing ball, I miss that. Like, people can gravitate to that and see where you're at, because not everybody plays in the NFL, but everybody goes through a transition season where they have something that they had that they miss, and that's a tough thing to work through. And I don't know, man. I don't know where I'd be without meaning, without purpose in life. And that's what drives me as an apologist is, yes, I know these things are true, but even more than that, it's created meaning in my life. I'm living for a bigger purpose. And, it's inspiring to hear you say these things because you've come from something that is cool. I mean, when I see these guys running out of the locker room, I get chills watching those guys, man. That's powerful. That's amazing. I can't imagine just the feeling of that. But then, of course, nowadays, man, you're learning more about the brain damage that these guys are facing and they're having to wrestle with. And now, thankfully, we're in a place where we've put better safety protocols in place, and we're learning more about the mental health of athletes after they've, battled this fight for, years in the NFL. And it just says a lot about your character to say, I could play another year, but, what am I putting on the line? It's a lot, man. It's a lot there. So I just appreciate you sharing that,
Well, no, it's funny. I appreciate you saying that. And that one of the things that helped me transition was to hear other players' stories and to know I wasn't alone, that so many other players have gone through the same thing. And you're right. Everybody has these transition moments in life. And it's just something I've never been good at. I've never been good at change. I'm just a routine guy. I like my routine the same. I want to do the same things. I just want, and I'm also not a visionary. I need somebody to give me the routine. And so when football was done, I lost the routine and I had no vision. And you talk about running out of the tunnel. This was another thing too. So there's nothing like running out of the tunnel, right? So when you get your name called and those fireworks go off and you have 70,000 people screaming because you're getting, there's nothing like that. And an NFL season is just like highs and lows and highs and lows. And then you get done and everything's just the same all the time. There's there's little ups and little downs, little ups and little downs. But there's nothing like the emotion. And like you miss the emotional roller coaster that you hated while you were playing. You get done and you're like, I missed that. I missed the emotions of it. So it's about becoming reaccustomed to just kind of normal life where it's like, this is just, there aren't the super highs and super lows. But going back to the other point, talking to players who had been through it and who had struggled with it, and getting tips and pointers and things that they did to get over it really helped. And that's why I always try to be very honest with my story, because if it helps somebody, it's definitely worth sharing.
Sure. And you mentioned, man, that it's put you and a place to have some conversations too with other players. And I know you guys do that a lot on the podcast, the 3-point stance. Do you mind sharing just a little bit about the 3-point stance and what you guys are doing there? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the 3-point stance started. We're trying to touch. What we focus obviously on football. That's kind of our primary focus. We want to do football stories, but we don't want it just to be about, here's what happened on Sunday. We don't just want another Monday morning quarterback where we're talking about, the different X's and O's and that kind of stuff. We're really trying to tie in the social issues and some of the broader picture stuff through different guests that are heading up different things. So we had Chris Long on recently. Chris Long was a player a long time he played for the Rams for a long time, and then he played for the Patriots, won a Super Bowl there. He played for the Eagles, won a Super Bowl. He's Howie Long's son. He's come out as an advocate, well, not really an advocate, but he's come out and said, look, I used marijuana while I was playing football to help me with my with the pain and stuff I was going through. And so I told the story on the podcast about when we had Chris on the podcast. So these are issues we're trying to talk about. So not just about football, but let's talk about some of these broader issues with marijuana usage and pain medication and how you deal with playing football and the impact it has on your body. And I had from 2009 on, so my third year in the league all the way through when I finished, there wasn't a practice that I didn't have at least either Vicodin, Toradol, some kind of hard pain medication in my body to get through it. Because I have terrible shoulders, terrible knees. I mean, your body takes a beating, but you need to get through. And we would do halfway through the season, they take your blood and they do a blood work check to see what see your enzymes, your hemoglobin, oxygen in your blood. And every year my blood work would come back and they'd say, look, you're like an 80-year-old cancer patient who smokes cigarettes. I mean, you just have terrible blood because of these pain meds. Like, you got to get off them. And I would say, listen, I can't. I need them to play. If I get off these medications, I can't function on Sunday. And so it was really interesting to talk to Chris because I had been somebody who'd been pretty dogmatically opposed to marijuana usage. But now it becomes legal. And you have guys using it as a way to mitigate pain and to sleep at night, which was another thing I struggled with. I used to have to take Ambien to go to bed at night because I was in so much pain. And so he talked about, just gave his testimony about how to help with his pain, help him sleep at night. And it didn't do nearly as, anything you take is going to do some damage, but it didn't do nearly the amount of damage it did with the pain medication that I was taking. But yet there's this stigma that I had myself against marijuana usage. But, if you want to take Vicodin or Percocet, well, all day, whatever you got to do to get on the field. So that was just one story. We've done about 30 episodes, and each episode kind of covers a topic like that. And so, yeah, it's been fun. Now, some episodes are more football oriented, right? We talked to different guys, Hall of Famers, about their careers and things like that. But whenever a social issue comes up, we really try to touch that and dig in and press in. And so it's more than just football, more than just sports, but about some of these ancillary social things that are going on that I think people are paying more attention to now. And just like with apologetics, it's important to have a well thought out, reasoned response and opinion on those things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I have had some conversations like that where I think the apologetic study, the philosophy, does help you to see what's maybe a good argument to make for something or a bad argument to make for something, especially with these social issues. And I know absolutely nothing about drug usage because I never had to use or anything like that. I just never had any of that in my life. But as I've talked to college students or as I've talked to people around me, especially those who have been involved in sports, and can go get prescription meds for something that's highly, a lot of times those painkillers become addictive. They become, I've had these conversations where students come to me and say, hey man, what about medical marijuana, used in this case, and it doesn't have near the, addictive, stimulants, all these things. And honestly, I mean, it's caused me to rethink some of the ideas that we have about, painkillers and things. I'm not an expert in that field, and I don't pretend to be, but it does, man. We've got to talk about these issues. At least talk about them. At least talk about, drug usage and why we use certain things that maybe are more addictive, more harmful than others, and why, what's the stigma, and let's talk about it. And that's why I appreciate your podcast, because I think what you're doing is just bringing those issues to the table and just talking about them and being real about them. And it's important to do that. I mean, if we're gonna have answers for the existence of God and all these great philosophical questions, that's great. But then I think a lot of people who are just trying to get through their life with meaning and purpose and value, they want to ask some of these questions about the social issues that are out there. And I just feel like it's a really unique thing. I know that your podcast is not, as far as I know, it's not necessarily a faith-based podcast. It's we're talking football and we're talking about these issues, and your faith plays a big role in that.
Right.
But still, I would. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, no, I think the one thing that I think I've changed in my own thought process is I don't think that society determines morality. I do think that Christian ethics are right and true, and that there is an objective morality out there. Now, our interpretation of what Christian ethics is can differ. And so what I think that's good about society, and as society's morality changes, it forces us as Christians to press in on issues that we might have thought were cut and dry, to really go back and say, well, what does the scripture say? What do our philosophical arguments say about this? And should we be as dogmatically opposed to this stuff as we first were, based on what the text says, and what the scriptures say, and what our theologies tell us, and what our philosophies tell us? And so that's why I enjoy some of these conversations, because not necessarily will they change my mind, but they force me to rethink the issues and reflect on the issues. And you and I were talking about it, I think, before we came on. It gives you you seeing somebody else's point of view, seeing what they've been through, what they struggle with, what their thought process is. So it gets us kind of out of our own echo chamber, right? Which is so important. We need to hear these other stories, see where people are coming from, and then reflect on our ethics. And again, it's not that society determines ethics, but it forces us to reevaluate and see, okay, how should we approach these issues? And so you're right. The 3 Point Stance isn't really a faith-based podcast. But we do take that angle a lot, and it has forced me in my own life to go back and re-look through things, and I've changed my mind on some things.
Yeah, that's neat, man. I think it does. It calls you to really be okay with changing. I think a lot of people are scared of change, are scared of thinking something differently than they did the day before. But that's how you get closer to that objective truth, right? We're trying to understand things that we may not have all the answers to, and I think the best thing to do for me when we're having these conversations about social issues, and it may be even something I'm uncomfortable talking. I'm not super comfortable talking about medical marijuana or drugs or any of those things.
Right.
I'm just not experienced in any of it, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. So I try to just sit back and listen, and I think that's good. Like just listen and learn and hear people out. And you don't always. The great thing is, as an apologist, I'm very concerned with answers. I want to give answers, but I've gotten comfortable going, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't. But I want to have this conversation with you, and I want to get to see your point of view and weigh that in, pray about it, read the Word of God, and look into the issue more deeply. And then after spending some time on it, you want to come to a conclusion that's fine. But you don't have to. You can say, it's okay to say, I don't know the answer. I want to seek the answer, but I don't know it just yet. I think that's the best approach than just giving throwing something out there that you don't have a strong basis for believing in or foundation undergirding it.
Well, and something that it's great being a podcast host. And the one thing I've seen within Christianity is you can find Christians who support things that you would think are totally way out there and not under the Christian umbrella. But you have Christian thinkers that you can find who support these different things. And so what's great about a podcast is you can sit down and interview these people and just sit back and listen and dialogue, and you don't have to. You can just let them talk about it. And so that's the one thing I've been interested with the 3 Point Stance, and I know it's come through on your podcast as well. Is you can just let other people who have more experience, let them go, let them hear their thing. And it's really helpful.
It's the great thing, man, about being an interviewer. I don't take any of the flack. If my guest says something that offends somebody, I'm just like, hey, I'm just asking questions. I didn't say anything. I'm just asking the questions.
That's right. You're great. You're off the hook. Yeah, it's true. I never thought of it like that, but you're right. Yeah, no, that's good.
That's right. All right, man. Well, thank you for coming on, man. This has just been a fun conversation. Very, just kind of going with the flow. You and I talked some before our talk, our actual talk, through emails and things. But preparing for this was just so easy and just laid back, and it's just I just felt like your story was interesting. I just wanted to have a conversation where we just kind of talk about your story, where you're at now, and some things that people can learn from your point of view as someone who's played in the NFL and has, met so many interesting people in your own life. And so I just really enjoyed this. I know people can find you at the 3 Point Stance podcast. I don't know if you do anything outside of that, but if you have anything you wanted to plug, I don't know. But
Mike DeVito 70 on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. I guess everybody has to give that nowadays. Yeah, that's the 3 Point Stance. And Clark, this has been great, man. I hope we can do this again. I really appreciate your ministry and what you're doing. And I'm excited to continue to follow. I mean, you're doing a fantastic job. And so thank you so much for having me on. I love this conversation, and let's do this again. If anything along the lines of football and apologetics comes across, I'm always up to come back on.
Sure, man. We'll do it. Definitely. I appreciate it, man.
Awesome, Clark. Thanks, brother.
Thanks, Mike. All right, hey, we're good, dude.
Thought that I started showing my eyes closed. Old me was on pills, walking a tightrope. Spice smoke, and I was running from 5-0. Who'd have thought you'd be riding, bumping to my song? Who'd have thought I'd be downloaded on iPhones? Who'd have thought that I'd make it out of